40 years of marriage, and I thought I knew the woman who slept beside me. But one night I stumbled upon a truth so dark it nearly stole the breath from my chest. A truth that turned love into poison and trust into a weapon. And as I held those letters in my shaking hands, I realized that the family I had built my entire life around was not what it seemed. And the woman I trusted most was planning something far worse than betrayal. Thank you for being here with me. It means more than I can put into words. Please take a moment and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I'd truly like to know. My name is William. I am 72 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I had lived a blessed one. I worked with my hands, built a home from nothing, and raised 3 daughters who I thought carried my blood and my name, and I gave everything I had to a marriage that lasted 40 years. I was never a man of riches, but I was rich in the pride I carried for my family, in the sweat of my labor, and in the quiet evenings where I thought I was sitting in the safety of trust. My wife and I met when we were young. She had a smile that could quiet a storm, and I told myself from the moment I first saw her that she was the one. And when she agreed to marry me, I felt as though life itself had given me its greatest gift. For decades we shared the same roof, the same table, the same struggles and joys, and I never once questioned her loyalty. Not when times were hard, not when my body ached from years of work, not when whispers of doubt occasionally drifted my way. I dismissed them as nonsense, because love, at least for me, was a promise written in stone. I poured myself into being a father, showing up to school events, teaching them how to ride their bikes, staying up late to help with homework, and working overtime to make sure they never lacked for food or shelter. When I looked at them, I felt the world made sense. I saw purpose, and I saw my legacy, and I thought I had everything a man could ever ask for. But love, when it is betrayed, becomes a cruel trick, and trust, when it is broken, slices deeper than any blade. And though I did not know it then, the foundation I built my life upon was already cracked, waiting for the day it would collapse and leave me standing in the ruins of everything I thought was true. I was born in a small town where hard work was the only language a man knew. My father swung a hammer until his hands cracked, and my mother taught me that dignity was something no one could ever take from you unless you gave it away. And I carried those lessons with me every day of my life. When I became a young man, I learned what struggle really meant. I worked in factories that rattled with noise, hauled wood in the bitter cold, and came home with muscles aching but a heart proud, because every drop of sweat I gave was for a future I wanted to build. Then came marriage, and with it came responsibility that I embraced with everything in me. I promised myself that no matter how poor or tired I was, I would never let my family go without, and I would never let them feel unloved. My wife seemed to understand the same values. She spoke of loyalty, of standing together through thick and thin, and when our first daughter came into this world, I thought my life had reached its perfect shape. One child became 2, then 3, and though money was tight, I found joy in the smallest things, like watching them chase fireflies in the summer dusk, or listening to their laughter echo through the walls I worked so hard to keep standing. I carried pictures of them in my wallet, showed them off at work like a man who had struck gold, because to me they were my treasure, and my wife was the keeper of it all, the one I leaned on when exhaustion weighed heavy. I never thought of questioning where they came from, never thought of doubting the blood in their veins, because what father looks into his child's eyes and suspects a lie? I loved them too much for suspicion to even whisper in my mind. And yet, looking back now, I see little shadows I ignored. Moments when neighbors would comment on how none of the girls carried my features, how their eyes and smiles resembled someone else. And I would laugh it off, too proud and too blind to even consider another explanation. I see now how she changed the subject whenever the past was mentioned, how she kept certain boxes tucked away out of reach, how she guarded pieces of herself I thought were just old wounds best left untouched. I ignored it all, because I believed in love, I believed in loyalty, and I believed in the bond of family I had fought tooth and nail to protect. But betrayal, I would come to learn, is not something that shows its face in the light. It lurks in corners, in hidden drawers, in quiet moments you overlook, waiting until the day it chooses to reveal itself in the cruelest way possible. And for me, that day was closer than I ever could have imagined. It was an ordinary afternoon when everything I believed in began to crumble. The kind of day where the sun filters through the curtains and you think nothing in the world could go wrong. And yet that was the day my hands reached for a loose drawer in our old chest and found something that was never meant for me to see. The box was small, hidden beneath stacks of linens, its corners worn with age, and though I hesitated for a moment, something in my chest urged me to open it. Inside were letters, yellowed with time but sharp with words that cut through me like a blade. Words written not by me, but by another man. Words calling my wife by names only I thought I had the right to use. Words claiming pride over the daughters I had raised as my own. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might stop. My eyes burned as I traced each line again and again, hoping I had misread them, hoping it was some cruel mistake. But the truth was clear and undeniable. The children I had poured 40 years of my life into were born of another man, the shadow she had carried from her past. I sank into the chair beside me, gripping the pages until my knuckles turned white, memories flooding in all at once. The nights I worked 2 jobs so they could have school clothes, the times I went without so they could have more. The sacrifices I made thinking I was building something sacred, only to discover the foundation had been a lie. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but when I lifted my eyes, she was standing there in the doorway, and what I saw in her gaze froze me where I sat. There was no shame, no tears, no plea for forgiveness, only a cold, calculating stillness, as if she had been waiting for this day and already knew what it meant. In that moment, I understood that betrayal was not the end of her cruelty. It was only the beginning, because in her silence, I felt something darker, a threat that made my chest tighten, and though I said nothing, my soul trembled with the knowledge that the woman I thought I knew was capable of far more than lies. The hours that followed felt like a storm raging inside me, a storm no one else could see. I sat there with those letters trembling in my hands, and the weight of 40 years pressing down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. And as much as the words on those pages tore me apart, what tore me even deeper was the way she stood there watching me, her eyes void of remorse, as if my pain was nothing more than an inconvenience she had grown tired of hiding from. I thought of the nights I had held her hand when she was sick, the mornings I woke before dawn to bring home enough so she would never go hungry. The promises I made at that altar when I was still a young man who believed love could endure anything, and all at once I saw how hollow those promises had become. Because while I had been faithful in body and soul, she had carried another man's legacy under my roof and let me build a life on sand. I felt a grief so heavy it nearly drove me to the floor. Not because my daughters were not mine by blood, but because the trust I had placed in her had been trampled so carelessly. Because every memory we had built together was now shadowed by deceit. Still, I could not look at the girls and feel anything but love. For I had been the one to hold them when they cried. I had been the one to teach them right from wrong. I had been the one who shaped them into the women they had become. And nothing in this world, not even the truth of another man's claim, could erase the bond carved by years of sacrifice and devotion. But when I looked back at her, I realized something had shifted. For in her expression there was no guilt, no shame, no fear of losing me. Instead, there was something sharper, colder. And as I replayed the words in those letters and the years of subtle silences I had ignored, I began to see that her betrayal was not just a secret of the past. It was a weapon she now wielded in the present. The following days confirmed what my heart already knew. Accidents began to circle me like wolves in the night. The brakes on my truck failed, though I had serviced them myself only weeks earlier. The medicine I took for my aching joints tasted bitter and left me weak. Knives were left in strange places where one slip could have ended me. And though she smiled in front of others, I felt her eyes follow me in silence, measuring how much longer she would need to wait. It was a new kind of fear, not the kind that makes you run, but the kind that roots you to the ground. The kind that makes you realize the person lying beside you each night may no longer be your companion, but your enemy. And yet, even in that fear, a strange calm settled over me, for I understood that shouting, demanding, or raging would give her power, but silence, patience, and preparation would give me the chance to take it back. I loved my daughters too much to let myself vanish without a fight. I had given too much of my life to let betrayal be my final chapter. And so I chose to endure the quiet terror of those days with a steady face, letting her believe I was broken, while deep inside I began to plan the truth that would one day bring her world crashing down around her. Each passing day felt like walking across a thin sheet of ice. Every sound, every glance, every word between us carried a weight I had never known before. And though I kept my silence, my mind was never quiet. It studied her every move. It listened to the way her voice shifted when she thought I wasn't paying attention. It noticed the sudden kindnesses that felt more like masks than truth. She would bring me tea and linger in the doorway, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly when I sipped it. She would ask if I had taken my pills with a tone that sounded caring to anyone else. But to me it rang hollow, for I had already seen the tampering, already tasted the bitterness of something that didn't belong. Nights became the hardest, lying beside her in the same bed where we had once shared warmth. I could feel the cold distance between us grow like a wall. Her body stiff, her breath measured, as if she too was waiting, but not for comfort, for an ending. And yet I showed no fear. I pretended to be weary from age, to be dulled by the weight of heartbreak, because I needed her to believe she still had the upper hand. I needed her to think I was blind and broken, while in truth my eyes had never been sharper. There were moments when I would catch her staring at me with that chilling stillness, not the look of a wife caught in regret, but the look of someone already imagining a life without me in it, already calculating what she would gain once I was gone. That look told me everything. It told me I was no longer dealing with the woman I once loved. I was staring at a stranger in familiar skin, a stranger who carried the face of my wife but the heart of someone who could destroy me without hesitation. And even as fear gripped me in those silent moments, a stronger fire burned inside. For betrayal had wounded me, yes, but it had also awakened me, and I knew I could not let this be the end. I had to outlast her. I had to outthink her. I had to show her that while she plotted in shadows, I was preparing in silence for the day the truth would bring her to her knees. So I chose silence as my shield, and while she thought I was slipping deeper into despair, I was gathering every thread of truth I could find, every detail that would one day unravel the web she had woven around me. I began with the letters, carefully placing them in a folder I kept hidden away, making copies so that even if one disappeared, the words would still live on. I wrote in a journal each time something strange happened, each meal that tasted off, each time I found tools misplaced in the shed, each near accident that could have taken me from this world, and I noted the day, the time, and the circumstance until the pages grew thick with evidence. I paid quiet visits to my lawyer, a man who had known me long enough to see through the calm mask I wore, and I told him everything, showing him the letters and the journal, asking him to keep them safe in case I did not survive what I feared was coming. He looked at me with solemn eyes and promised me that my words would not vanish into silence, that my story would be told if I no longer could. I even visited my doctor under the pretense of routine checkups, quietly asking him to check the bottles of my medicine to confirm that they had been tampered with. And when he looked up at me with a troubled expression and nodded, I knew I was not imagining the danger I felt pressing in around me. At home, I played the part of the weary old man, letting my hands tremble when she watched, letting my shoulders sag, letting her believe I was too weak to fight back. But inside, I was sharper than ever, alert to every flicker of her eyes, every tone of her voice, every quiet attempt to measure how close she was to succeeding. I even began to change my will in secret, not to leave everything to her as she may have expected, but to protect what I had built for the daughters I still loved. For no matter whose blood ran in their veins, they were mine in every way that mattered. And I would not let betrayal rob them of a father's final gift. I lived each day as though I was playing a game of patience, waiting for the moment her confidence would grow so bold she would make her final move. And though fear gnawed at me, though the thought of closing my eyes at night filled me with unease, I held on to one truth stronger than all the rest, that if she wanted me gone, she would have to face the strength of a man who had already lost everything but his resolve. And resolve is not so easily destroyed. In the middle of all this darkness, when my heart felt heavier than it had ever been, light came from a place I did not expect. My granddaughter, the youngest of the family, sharp-eyed and tender-hearted, who had always been close to me in ways words cannot capture. She would visit after school, dropping her bag by the door and sitting at the kitchen table with me, and one evening she tilted her head and asked why I always checked my cup before I drank, why I stirred the food more than I ate it, why I locked the shed twice when once had always been enough. Her voice carried no suspicion, only concern, but it pierced through the mask I had been wearing, and for the first time I felt the weight of silence ease, even if just a little. I didn't tell her everything, for I would not lay such a burden on young shoulders, but I told her enough for her to understand that something was not right in this house. And the way her eyes widened and then narrowed with determination made me realize that I was not as alone as I had thought. From that day on, she became my quiet ally, slipping me notes that she had overheard, whispering about conversations she had caught in passing, bringing me comfort in her presence without ever letting on to anyone else. It was her steady gaze that reminded me I still had reasons to endure, that I still had someone watching out for me. And her loyalty was a strength I drew upon more than she will ever know. She brought me hope in a time when hope felt like a memory, and she unknowingly reminded me that betrayal could not erase the bonds that are real, the bonds built on love, not secrets. I realized then that my fight was no longer just about survival. It was about protecting the innocent hearts still tied to mine, ensuring they would one day understand the truth and see that, even in betrayal, I chose dignity over despair. The days that followed with her by my side gave me strength, but they also reminded me how dangerous the silence in my home had become. And no matter how carefully I played the role of the weary old man, I could feel the danger circling closer, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, as I drove down the old road that led to our house, I pressed the brakes before reaching the bend, and the pedal sank to the floor with no resistance. My heart leapt into my throat as the car lurched forward, and by nothing short of grace I managed to steer it into the ditch before the curve could take me over the edge. I sat there shaking, staring at the trees, knowing with absolute certainty that this was no accident, for I had maintained that vehicle myself, checked those brakes with my own two hands, and they had been sound only days earlier. That was the moment when all doubt left me, when every suspicion became truth carved in stone. She was no longer just a betrayer of vows, she was a threat to my life, and if I did not act, the next attempt might succeed. I went home that night in silence, washing the dirt from my clothes, sitting at the table while she asked if the drive had been safe, her voice smooth and steady, and I answered with the same calm mask I had worn for weeks, telling her all was fine while my mind screamed with the knowledge of what she had tried to do. I knew then I could not wait any longer. I could not leave my fate to chance or hope. I had to act with purpose, with precision, with patience that was finally ready to end. So I gathered every page of my journal, every letter I had copied, every note my granddaughter had shared with me, and I placed them in a sealed envelope for my lawyer, telling him that if anything happened to me, he was to deliver them directly to the authorities. I visited the police quietly, framing my words with care so as not to set off alarms that might reach her ears, and I showed them the evidence I had, telling them what I had lived with in silence. Their faces told me they understood. Their silence told me they believed, and their promise told me I would not be alone when the day came. Yet in my home, I acted as though nothing had changed, as though I was still too blind to see her plotting, still too broken to fight back, and I let her believe she was winning. But deep inside, my resolve was now sharper than steel, and I knew the time was near when all the masks would be torn away and she would finally see the man she had underestimated for far too long. When the decision was made in my heart, I began to set the stage with the patience of a man who had spent a lifetime learning the value of quiet endurance. And though fear still crept into my nights, I used it as fuel to sharpen my mind and steady my hand. I knew that to expose her, I had to let her believe the game was still hers to control. So I leaned even deeper into the role of the broken husband, letting my shoulders slump, letting my voice soften, even letting my steps falter when I walked across the room, all to convince her that my strength had withered away. But behind that mask, I was building the very moment she would never see coming, for I had already set my lawyer in place with every document secured. I had already given the police the details of her attempts, and I had already rehearsed in my mind the confrontation that would end it all. I chose a day when she expected me to be most vulnerable, a day she believed she could corner me once and for all. And I invited her to sit with me at the table we had shared for decades, the same table where we had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. But now, it had become the stage where the truth would be unveiled. She sat across from me, her eyes narrowed, her lips curled in that faint smile that no longer carried warmth. And I could see in her gaze the certainty that she had won, that I was only one step away from being erased. I spoke slowly, letting my voice carry the weight of calm instead of rage, telling her I knew everything, every letter, every lie, every attempt to take me from this world. And I watched as her expression shifted from confidence to shock, then from shock to fury. She tried to laugh it off, tried to tell me I was imagining things, that old age had clouded my mind. But before her words could take root, there was a knock at the door, sharp and deliberate, and the color drained from her face when she realized who stood on the other side. The officers stepped in with the papers I had prepared, with the journal, with the evidence she thought was buried. And in that moment, the power she had clung to for 40 years slipped from her hands like sand through a sieve. I sat there in silence, not gloating, not shouting, but steady, letting her see that the man she believed she had broken was the one who had brought her schemes to an end. It was not just a victory. It was a reclamation of the dignity she had tried to strip from me. And as they led her away, her eyes still burning with the rage of someone who had lost everything, I felt no joy, only a heavy peace, because I had survived, and I had done it without sinking to the level of the betrayal that nearly destroyed me. When the door closed behind her and the house fell into silence, I sat at that table for a long time, my hands resting on the wood worn smooth by decades of family meals. And though relief washed over me, it came with a sorrow I can barely put into words, for victory and betrayal is never sweet. It is heavy, and it is lonely. I thought of the years I had poured into this marriage, the laughter we once shared, the dreams we once spoke of in the quiet hours before dawn, and it struck me how all of it had been poisoned by secrets she had carried in her heart long before I ever knew. But even as grief pressed down on me, I knew I still had a duty to fulfill. For the truth had not only shattered me, it had the power to shatter my daughters, and I could not let them stumble into the storm without my hand to steady them. So I called them together, one by one, and when they arrived, their faces full of worry and confusion, I sat them down in the very room where they had grown up, and I told them everything, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the slow and steady voice of a man who had nothing left to hide. I watched as their eyes filled with tears, as disbelief twisted into pain, and as silence stretched so long it felt like it might break me apart. But I did not waver, for they deserved to know the truth, even if that truth cut deep. When the words were finally out, I told them the only thing I knew to be certain, that no letter, no test, no secret could erase the life we had lived together. That though blood had betrayed me, love had never faltered, and that I would go to my grave believing they were mine, because fatherhood is not written in veins, it is carved in sacrifice, in sleepless nights, in the laughter and the tears that only a parent truly knows. They cried, and I cried with them, the kind of tears that burn because they come from a wound that will never fully heal. But within that sorrow, there was a bond, a reminder that what we had shared was real, even if the foundation was built on lies. In that moment, I understood that betrayal can destroy a marriage. It can poison trust. It can twist love into something unrecognizable. But it cannot erase the years of devotion poured into the innocent. It cannot undo the memories etched in their hearts. And it cannot take from me the pride I carry for the women they became under my hand. And as I looked into their tear-stained faces, I felt a strength rise again, the strength of knowing that even though I had been deceived, I had not failed them. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. In the days that followed those heavy conversations, the weight of everything settled on me like a second skin. And though my daughters clung to me with love and sorrow, though they told me over and over that I would always be their father, I could still feel the ache of betrayal echoing in the empty corners of the house. For it is one thing to survive a storm, and another to live in the wreckage it leaves behind. News of her arrest spread quietly through the town, whispers carried by neighbors who had once admired our long marriage. And I could see in their eyes the shock of realizing that what looked perfect from the outside had been rotting away from within. Some shook their heads with pity, others with judgment. But I held my chin high, for I had nothing left to hide. And dignity, once reclaimed, cannot be stolen again. My nights were long, filled with memories that replayed like old films. The sound of her laughter when we were young, the touch of her hand when she still pretended to love me. And it was strange to mourn what I thought I had, while at the same time feeling grateful to have survived what she had become. My daughters visited often, bringing meals, sitting with me at the table, their presence filling the silence that had once threatened to suffocate me. And though there was pain in their eyes, there was also a fierce loyalty that gave me strength. I realized then that bloodlines may twist and betray, but bonds made through years of sacrifice do not break so easily. And while she had destroyed the illusion of our family, she had not destroyed the love that lived between me and the children I raised. I also found strength in routine, walking through the yard at sunrise, repairing small things around the house, tending to the garden as though each seed I placed in the soil was a declaration that life, even after betrayal, still has purpose. And with every day that passed, I felt more certain that my story was not one of ruin but of survival, of finding a way to stand tall even after the deepest cut. She had thought she would end me. She had thought her lies would bury me. But instead it was the truth that buried her. And I remained, scarred but standing, holding on to the life and the love she could not take away. And though I will never forget the taste of that betrayal, I carry with me a stronger truth, that a man's worth is not defined by the secrets others keep from him, but by the way he chooses to rise when those secrets come to light. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself learning to live with both the silence and the truth. And though the wound she left in me may never fully heal, I have come to see that survival itself is a kind of victory. For I am still here, breathing, standing, and holding close the people who chose to stay by my side when the mask of deceit finally fell away. I look at my daughters, and I know without doubt that love has nothing to do with blood. It is measured in years of sacrifice, in the lessons passed down, in the laughter shared and the tears wiped away. And though their mother tried to rewrite our story with lies, she could not erase the bond we forged in the fire of life itself. I carry regret, yes, but I also carry strength, because betrayal may have marked me, but dignity restored has carried me farther than bitterness ever could. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of my story. Your time and your presence mean more than you know. And if this story touched your heart, I ask you to subscribe so we can continue to share these truths together.